Welcome to the Low Production, High Value Show with your host, Andrew Jenkins. On the show, we'll be exploring the world of entrepreneurship, social media, and the growing digital landscape. Whether you're a seasoned entrepreneur or just starting out, you know that the world of business is constantly evolving and changing. And in today's digital age, it is more important than ever to understand how social media and technology are affecting the way we do business. That's why on this show, we'll be talking to entrepreneurs and experts who have a wealth of knowledge and experience to share with you. From the latest trends and technologies to the struggles and triumphs of running a business, we'll be covering it all. So if you're looking to level up your entrepreneurial game and become more digitally savvy, then let's get started with the Low Production, High Value Show.
Welcome to the latest episode of the Low Production, High Value Show. Today's guest is Mike Orr, co-founder of Grapevine6, which is now part of the, can I say Seismic family? Is it Seismic or Seismic? What did they?
Seismic, yeah.
That's what I thought. Okay. And that acquisition was 2020?
Yes, yeah, fall of 2020.
Well, and I want to, we'll use that as a jumping off point. So, what? By that time, how long had you been running Grapevine6?
It was about 8 years, so it was a fairly long run. I know some have gone longer, but our plan originally was to be done in 3 to 5 years. So 8 was a little over plan.
As they say, life is what happens when you plan, right?
Mm-hmm. But the last 3 years were the most fun, so we didn't complain much that it went 8 years.
What, did the acquisition come suddenly, or you were aware of one another for a while?
Yeah, we had been working on a partnership with Seismic for a long time. They had a great presence in our market, but they're sort of adjacent to it. So complementary markets, complementary products. It was a good fit. We'd been working on a partnership for a while, and then we were kind of conscious as well that the social networks were a little bit unpredictable. Our product is heavily dependent on social networks, and in the intervening years have gotten even more unpredictable. So that was a big external risk for us. And so we were conscious that to expand in the market and to take away, de-risk it for ourselves and the company too, we needed a bigger partner. We needed to be part of a bigger family, if you will.
One of our tech vendors for years was very, very Twitter-centric.
Mm-hmm.
Now X. I still call it Twitter. I don't care. And to your point, they, over the last year, have made a series of acquisitions to diversify the social networks they serve and the analytics they provide and so on. I asked them, and they claim that Twitter is still growing and still active, but it still concerns me, to have all of your eggs in one basket. So anyway, I digress.
It's a crazy basket too. We had them in one basket. I don't know if it would be that one.
Yeah, it saddens me a little because Twitter had a special place in my heart. It was my favorite for the longest time, but just very erratic. And for those listening, as we're recording this, the Code Conference just happened this week in California, and Linda Yaccarino, this supposed to be CEO of X, but she's being accused of being a CEO in name only, because it seems Elon's running things. Anyway, she was interviewed at the Code Conference, and I don't think a lot of people left with confidence of that's not a reflection on her, just it didn't quell people's concerns about the chaos that is happening on the platform. Anyway, well, that's enough about Twitter. So you have this 8-year journey. How did it begin?
Well, it started at really the group of us getting together at a marketing agency here in town. It's an integrated marketing agency. One of my friends from college sold his company to that agency, it was a digital development shop.
Mm-hmm.
And so they became the digital arm in the agency. And I joined up with them back, we just finished my MBA at Rotman, and wanted to do more sort of creative user experience work. And so I joined them at the agency in about 2009. And in those years was really the rise of content marketing and how brands were changing the way that they were engaging customers in B2C and in B2B. And content was really the currency of that communication. And there was a bunch of technology that came out, right? There was marketing automation technology, there was social listening technology, but it was all very big and complicated and expensive. It all worked really well. And there was a lot of money flowing to it, but it wasn't accessible to entrepreneurs. And so when we finally left the agency after doing work with a bunch of those platforms and kind of getting, drinking the Kool-Aid a little bit on how powerful they can be for driving relationship, especially compared to some of the old, methods of doing that with brand and digital. We wanted to build software, and we thought, hey, we're entrepreneurs. My friend had done this before and really understood that market and the need. And the need was if every entrepreneur could have their own agency and use these content marketing and marketing automation strategies and tools, they'd be way more effective. And so that was kind of the early idea, was how do we make content marketing as a practice accessible to entrepreneurs? And with all the social data that was available, it was like you could access everyone's CRM, because LinkedIn used to be pretty open and it was like this big, CRM pre-populated. And so you could do a lot of analysis to figure out what people's interests were, and be more effective in targeting them with content. So yeah, that was kind of the genesis.
Were you early in incorporating AI? I mean, it's now like it's top of mind with everyone. I was just at the Elevate conference, and it was, the subject of so many different sessions, but AI has been integrated or incorporated in a number of technology solutions for years. We just didn't know we were using it. And I'm just wondering if you were an early player.
Yeah. And I think the modes of AI have changed certainly over the time. Like our application of AI, it was funny because we thought this would be pretty easy. Google had already solved search, and there was Google appliances, and that became a soft thing at one point. And so we figured we could just use Google to find the content. We just needed to figure out what the search query was. But it turned out that Google isn't necessarily good at this specific task. Like their search is very good at answering questions, but not finding content in a general intersection of interests.
Not recommended.
So we had to build our own indexer, and we had to do a lot of work in NLP. We did a lot of named identity recognition work, and really trying to figure out relevance, right? And the a lot of language processing to figure out what interest is going to drive the most, or what intersection of interest is going to drive the most relevant content, so that you could, at that time, it was trying to share it directly. So I would look your profile up and find something really relevant to share with Andrew as a sales tactic or really specific one-to-one marketing. But then what we found was everybody was looking themselves up, our users. They weren't actually sending anyone content. They were looking themselves up, and we asked them, why are you doing that? Why don't you send this? And they said, well, I got to share some stuff to social too, and this does a really good job of figuring out my interests are, and I really like all the articles it shows me, so that's how I'm using it. And so that was an early pivot for us to make it all about that user and their personal brand and how they go out and engage in social, because that was really the gap. It wasn't the, necessarily the salesperson trying to find that perfect piece to start a conversation with a specific person.
But just to sort of recap that scenario, you went out, like, with part of the development, was it based on the team's collective, like they had their own, shall we say, pain points that you wanted to address? I think of Slack, that was a gaming company first, and they'd built their own collaboration platform internally because there wasn't anything out there that they liked.
Yeah.
So
sure.
Were you sort of the guinea pigs first, and then?
Yeah, and my partner Wayne was definitely, always the salesperson in his company, and moving forward into the agency, he did sales for a whole digital group. And so it was his kind of idea of, as a salesperson, if I had an agency to help me craft these communications that I need to start these conversations and find, relevant, personalized content for each of them, he'd be a way more effective salesperson. And so that was the initial design. And then once we actually put it out to some people that were willing to use it, and that was kind of, the idea was entrepreneurs, but we went to talk to, because there's a bunch of people that kind of finally, fall into that loose definition of entrepreneur or small business owner. And it ended up surprising us who those people were, a lot in wealth management. But that wasn't the original intent. They just really thought, I need to use this. And they would use it to, instead of targeting their customers or trying to identify their interests, they would use it for themselves and figure out what their interests are and what relevant content they could share. Because there's a big gap where marketing could only produce so much content, and it was always brand content. And so it wasn't really relevant necessarily for the advisor or the wealth manager to share. In social, maybe they could add some commentary, but it looked very wooden, and they didn't have time to go find other stuff. So it was a big problem. And turns out there's a lot of financial advisors out there. And so we went
same problem.
and sold to them. Yeah.
Well, we did a project with a bank where we curated third-party content, and because my argument to the bank was, or what I was emphasizing was, if I get a mortgage from a mortgage specialist, and for the next 5 years till my renewal, the entire extent of our communication is them sending me an email about rates. That doesn't build a relationship. So give me something else.
Well, it's very tenuous, right? Like the switching cost isn't that high. And if somebody else builds a relationship, like, you don't really care necessarily who your mortgage broker is. If you have a friend that is a mortgage broker, or has a friend that's a mortgage broker or whatever, that it's an easy switch to just go to them instead. So yeah, building that. One of our customers, I think their directive was something, it was like 20 non-portfolio touch points in a year, right? That each advisor had to have with their customers. Like, that's a lot of not talking about, and what are you going to talk about? Like, it's a lot of conversation to fill.
It's good advice, but to your point, the execution of it, daunting. Well, when it came to working in financial services, were you a bit of a Trojan horse in that, were there rogue financial advisors using you without the blessing of corporate? And so that got you entree into corporate, or did you start at the top and work your way down to the field?
We were better at sales than marketing. We kind of learned that as our core strength. Like, we had one early customer, it was like a beta kind of customer, where it was a license to market to their advisors. And so, but their advisors would have to make the decision one at a time of whether they want to pay for it. And I think that was the only revenue we made that year, and it was about $2,000. So we recognized that we were not going to be able to scale with marketing, although coming from an agency, it wasn't our strong suit. We were better at sales. We were better at B2B sales, like $1 million, big deal, like worked, for 12 months to close that deal. That was what we were really good at. And so that's how we approached that market. And I've seen it done the other way. One of the, big software vendors was infamous for calling all of the advisors and getting them, to start calling the headquarters to force them to take a meeting to buy their software. And they would drive the buyers nuts because, they don't necessarily have bandwidth for that. It's not much they can control.
You've already
all these phone calls. It's high pressure selling. But we were a little bit more elegant than that. But that's how we really approached it from, I think the Trojan horse was really our customers. So our first lead customer, who would, before they even became a customer, because it took so long to validate and build the project plan and implementation and do all this stuff, they were pulling out old technology and putting our stuff in. So it was a big challenge in onboarding us as a vendor. But she went to a industry conference, a small industry conference, where they have industry only roundtables, like no vendors at the table.
Yeah.
They all talk about
A safe space.
social media marketing. Yeah. And it's great because it's very generally, they're all pretty open and honest, and it's not influenced or whatever. And so she would talk about us, and that got us, into the next few meetings, and kind of got the ball rolling. It was a huge win for us.
Well, and if you had to describe the origin idea of what Grapevine6 was versus what it was 2020 when acquired, how similar or dramatically different was the platform from the original idea?
I would say it wasn't that we were still trying to really deliver, marketing technology capabilities to individuals. And a lot of that revolved around content, and a lot of it, social was a delivery mechanism. We did some stuff directly with marketing automation platforms at the time because it was very hard to track how this activity generates value, right? Even for the individuals doing it. Because it's not necessarily a one-to-one kind of conversion. You're not, posting something, somebody clicks through and they bought whatever you're selling. It's multiple touch points. They're long sales cycles, especially with, B2B sales or advisors. So I would say we did a pretty good job of realizing that vision. I think, initially it was more directed outside, and it really, I think we didn't recognize it needed to start inside. You need to start from a strong personal brand. And that was a big weakness out there. That was a gap that you couldn't connect with other people unless you could first really represent yourself authentically. So that became a much bigger part of the solution, I think, than we I don't even think we envisioned that originally. So,
well, did you message that in some of your content and your, like, I'll call it corporate messaging, about the way I've described it in some of the LinkedIn training I've done? There's two sides to the coin. There's the passive side, how you present yourself from a personal brand in a social context. And then there's the proactive and how you navigate the social media landscape to engage and influence prospects and existing clients.
Yeah, for sure. And that was, we didn't do training kind of to your level, but we would definitely, you needed to have the context of why you should do this, like what the value is, what's the outcome that's going to collectively happen out based on these steps that I'm taking. And it was rare that, there was stories about somebody sharing something that got noticed by someone that, didn't realize this person was an advisor or, whatever. And that was an engagement point that started a conversation that ultimately led to a big, book of business moving over to that advisor. But often it was just, part of all of the, tactics and ways of representing yourself, and your ability to build trusted relationships. And so social was a component of that, and having an opinion and like differentiating yourself from everyone else was a way to, in such an easy way, right? To, like, it's so hard, especially in sales, to get the other person on a live conversation. Why not continuously sort of influence them through activity, and that refers back to a great personal brand in social. Mm-hmm. It makes sense, and so we would train that, but would not like to the full extent, but making sure that they understood, it's as a context, it's part of a larger thing that you're trying to do, and here's some of the things you need to do to be successful. We're trying to make the hard stuff easier with the technology.
So after you do this training, was training mostly to the field people, or was there also exposure to, I'll call it the overseers or other stakeholders, so, especially the ones who maybe authorized the check to be cut to buy it all, so that they saw, oh, okay, we've put 400 financial advisors on this, and here's what's happening, and here's where it rolls back to our ROI. Did you have to do some of that stakeholder management and change management?
For sure. I think any big sale these days requires, a variety of steps and tactics. And part of it is sometimes it depends on the customer. So the first thing is figuring out what is the landscape at that customer, what are the dynamics, how do they think about their current vendor, how do they think about the other vendors, how do they think about the program, if they have one or not. What are their goals with regarding their advisors, right? Like, are they trying to increase are they trying to recruit advisors? Are they trying to, get a set of advisors to become more technology savvy? Or are they just trying to appease a couple of really loud ones? We had where we invited advisors into a sales pitch, which I think was one of the most effective things that we ever did, because they weren't ever really part of the decision committee. They didn't write the checks. It was the field marketing managers and their bosses that owned web and email and like all the marketing tools that advisors use. But bringing a couple of advisors in from the field that at the end of it said, this is exactly what we need. This solves all the challenges that we have right now in the field, was really effective at removing a pretty entrenched incumbent, where it was a lot of work on their side to rip and replace that system. So it was a high hurdle. It was a big switching cost. And that was a really effective tactic that we used to get them over that and get them excited about it, and then start getting the field excited about it as well. We would do whatever the customer needed. If it was train the trainer, if it was train executives, it was one-on-one. If it was go, sit in an office in New York somewhere with a couple of advisors, I wish I did, and, train them directly. It's such a varied landscape that you got to be, if you can be flexible, you can be successful.
Mm-hmm. Well, so you train them. I'll call that's up front. Did you have periodic check-ins, maybe a bit of, when I say coaching, I don't mean literally at the field level of like one-to-one with an advisor, but I'm wondering about how did you ensure rollout? How did you ensure retention and stickiness of adoption? What sort of factors played into that?
It's tough. I think it's probably one of the hardest things in software, especially enterprise. I mean, you can mandate that everyone has it and uses it and goes through the training and whatever you can do, but if they don't see value, and it's always competing, right, with the 8 other things they need to do in the next hour, or all the different customers they need to talk to. I think everyone has that challenge, and so we invested pretty heavily in customer success. Had a great team that built relationship and would have weekly or monthly meetings with the customers, go through all the metrics, plan out, here's, tactics that you can use over the time to improve your metrics, improve your performance. We'd have annual big meetings with all of the executive stakeholders to understand how the program went and what the plan was. It was a lot of fun because we developed really strong relationships with our customers. They trusted us a lot. So they would share their strategy for the coming year. Once a year, like, here's our priorities, here's what we're trying to go do, here's what objectives we're trying to achieve, some of the investments we're going to make, and here's what we need from you. And that would help us sort of shape product strategy, as well as how to shape these programs to fit in with all of the different initiatives that they're taking and just make them more effective. The customers are big enough that you could do some of that fairly bespoke and custom, and it was just fascinating to me to understand what challenges they're are most pressing for them and how they're going about solving them. And that would really inform how we thought about the product and what the next thing it could do, or the language, the marketing, like however we positioned it for the customer we didn't have, because they're going through the same problems, right? They're all experiencing, they may be slightly different tactics, but it was a great way to understand context. So very active engagement with the teams. The other cool thing that I think like, I don't know if everyone has this experience, but kind of when you get into the weekly and monthly metrics, they go up and they go down, or seasonality and all different things happen. There's a, financial crisis and there's COVID or whatever, like different sort of blips. But then when you look back on like a year's worth of activity, and you can look at, this, sort of rate, or it's going up or down or whatever. But if you look at it as comprehensive volume, and there's like, 500,000 posts or something, like that's a huge amount of activity collectively. And some of those metrics, when we do these annual reviews, are like, wow, that's really impressive. Like we've had like 12 newsletters go out or something, but we've, posted 500,000 times collectively as a group.
Wow. Well, and that's where I wanted to go was, because you have access to all this data, were you, whether it was the customer success people or not, flagging, so-and-so at such and such a company is doing something interesting because they're an anomaly. They're like, outperforming by, leaps and bounds. And would you reach out to them and say, like, what is it you're doing? What's your strategy? Or how are you, just walk us through how you're using the platform, because you must be doing something different. And I don't know if you would then showcase them as a showcase use case.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, some of them you could just tell, like the thoughtfulness, like the article might be like 3 paragraphs, but they'd write like 8 for the post. Like the post itself was more than the content that they were linking to sometimes. Some just were very high depth of analysis. Some just had really big networks, right? And were very active and engaging. And so their click-through rates were really high. We would always, because a very like, not sort of follow the leader, but that kind of idea, like looking for exemplars and modeling behavior. I think more than a lot of those sales, and any really role with like a sales component to it. While they talk about, sort of methodical data, based process, a lot of it is just looking to an exemplary behavior, somebody you trust, and trying to model that. Like, I like that with that person, they're successful. I like them. I think I can do what they're doing. What are they doing? They're calling, 10 people before 10 a.m. Whatever these little, heuristics and things that people pick up. More so than, I get like in management, you're modeling the stuff and funnels and all that sort of thing, but that's not how, on the ground, I don't think that's where the behaviors happen.
And I've always, in like management consulting or wherever you want to look at, is that any external party comes in to an organization and says, you should do this. And the people get defensive, their backs up, or the not invented here sort of scenario. But if I'm using Grapevine6 and I look across the sales floor and I see, Bob or Mary just killing it, to your point, if they're an exemplar and I like them, I respect them, and the numbers don't lie, then, I believe it a little better, or a little more than,
you're more likely than, to actually adopt some of that stuff.
I don't care if Mike told me to do this.
I find like it's more in your point of contact or your executive relationships, or what, like, I think good software vendors are kind of like consultants too. Like, they're not necessarily, you need to go do this, but it's, our customers with these kind of characteristics are doing this kind of thing, or this is the big challenge they're trying to figure out, is how do you tie this data together? Just give a little bit of like guidance and be a kind of like arbiter of knowledge across the industry, which was also, I think, a fun thing to do. And then it just makes those conversations so much more valuable when you get a perspective outside of your company, and get some idea of what your, necessarily competitors at that level, but like your peers are doing and how what challenges they're trying to overcome.
Well, and you talked about this, the idea of an exemplar, and it's often been talked about how LinkedIn's got, 800 million plus members globally, but a very small percentage are active and share content. Now, if you're among that small group, then you have the chance for some pretty high visibility. But, over your time at Grapevine6 and then your time at Seismic, I'm wondering what your philosophy is. You talked about how that one example where they took a 3-paragraph article, they added 8 paragraphs to personalize it, infuse it with, their perspective, maybe add some facts and figures depending on what it was about. From under the umbrella of social selling, what's your take on what people need to do in this ever-evolving landscape to succeed with social selling?
And now, a word from our sponsor. Social media has become an imperative for almost every business. Discover how to successfully implement an effective social media strategy that is supported and integrated throughout every part of your organization with this essential book from our host, Andrew Jenkins. Social Media Marketing for Business, Scaling an Integrated Social Media Strategy Across Your Organization, is now available from Amazon or KoganPage.com.
That's a good question, and it was certainly asked a few times over the years. What works, and or what should we do? My answer was
ask them again.
Generally, yeah. If I knew, it's like somebody telling you what stock should I buy? It's like I knew I wouldn't tell you, right? I'd go buy all that stock. I think it's more about it's about authenticity, right? So, you don't have to figure it all out day one. You can try stuff, what feels good, what doesn't feel good. There's a whole hey, we should write a blog or write, these sort of long form posts. And if that's not you, if you write one and 4 years later, you're I should have written. If you're not continuously in a writing mode and you get joy out of it, don't do it, because you're not going to do it, right? Or you're not going to do it well. I imagine that person that wrote 8 paragraphs about each post that piece of content they shared, they were super analytical. They always had an opinion about everything. They like to share that opinion. And if that's, my point there is that's what's either going to resonate with you and connect with you, live and in person and through the course of that relationship, or it's not. There's no point in engaging with somebody or trying to be everything to everyone, because you're not, and that is going to come out in a few conversations, and especially as you're long, lived relationships. You want people that, understand your style. If it's one of our biggest customers would only ever share one piece, every week or 2 or something. It was very rare, because they were just super thoughtful. They would read everything and they would use the app continuously, read and then pick the one thing. Okay, this is the one I think people should see.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what they were, that's their whole personality.
Yeah. But that was their version of authenticity.
Yeah.
But even within that, one of the things we argue for is consistency. Because people, if they fall into a habit of knowing they're going to see content from you on a regular basis, it's not that it's going to be a 2,000-word blog every day, because that's hard to sustain anyway. But if that person who was writing that very thoughtful piece once a week, that was still there, they were being authentic and they were being consistent. It's not that it had to be an everyday kind of thing. But even that as an objective for someone in the social selling sphere of just being consistent. Even for myself and some others that I admire, mix it up. As in, you don't have to write that 2,000-word blog every day. It's hard to sustain. I've been playing with ChatGPT lately, and this isn't about me, but just using these sort of available tools to add some variety and have some fun. I had ChatGPT write a social media strategy, but written in millennial and Gen Z slang. And I shared it on LinkedIn, and it's been the best performing post of the last year.
Oh, nice.
No one's going to take it. No one's going to implement that strategy. Yeah. But the tone in which it was tongue in cheek. And then more recently, it has nothing to do with social media. I said to ChatGPT, write a letter from the CEO telling people that it's return to office, but the CEO is William Shakespeare and the staff are returning to the Globe Theater, and write it in Shakespearean prose. And anyway, it's getting, lots of attention as well. And it just goes back to like, that's me being authentic. And I'm just having some fun. It's not, I'm not putting it out there like, well, this is going to make me a sale. No, I don't. It's not.
Yeah, no, and I think it's well, I think it's two things. One, the consistency is really important because it is a skill, right? And you can't develop a skill, you can't develop your voice, you can't develop your brand, and your thinking without activity, right? Without that exercise of trying to, find the through path or whatever, the thread that's relevant in all of these posts. I think really the exercise is a great way to, like, we remember there was an early partner that we had that had a great program, but it was like a heavy, multi-week, program for advisors to build their business, right? And start from a whole market analysis, and here's how to run through like 3, weeks of figuring out who am I going to sell to, and then what is my brand going to be, and how do I message that? I think the other way of doing that is more of a, lean startup MVP kind of thing. It's like, just do something, right? And then you can refine that over time as you see what works, right? What doesn't, what feels right. And it's sort of an emergent brand, which I think is so much easier to get started. The consistency has to be there or you never get anywhere. And then also I like that idea, like one of the big ideas in marketing that I learned is like, if everybody's going one way, sometimes it's good to go the other way, right? Because you need to find these ways to kind of stand out. Or if you're doing it once a week, and then, one week do it like every day, and then next week don't do it for a month. And sometimes that change is what gets attention too. So yeah, some good techniques. I don't think there's one answer. I think it's about, enjoying it and doing it for the value of sharing knowledge and connecting with people. And like, I think it's a great exercise.
Well,
surprised more people don't do it.
If people reflect back on, to your point, so if you do anything with some consistency, you look at the numbers. How did what I share perform? And then also, okay, so here's stuff that performed well, but also here's, let's layer on or correlate that with the stuff I enjoyed sharing or the stuff I enjoyed writing. And so that it doesn't feel so burdensome to maintain that consistency if you're writing and sharing stuff that you enjoy doing so. But when you talk about contrarian, one of my favorite examples is the newspaper writer Jimmy Breslin, and I talk about this in the content marketing module in my U of T class. And when JFK was assassinated and the media was covering his funeral, most of the media covered the procession through Washington, D.C. Jimmy went to the cemetery and interviewed his gravedigger. And won a journalistic award for doing so. And that's not why he did it, but just that I'm going to go, they're all zigging, I'm going to zag over here. And to your point, I've seen that in some other examples in content where it's like, I'm going to go camp over here and do my thing and find my audience. So,
yeah, it doesn't always work, but when it does, it's a big multiplier.
For sure. Well, I want to put our entrepreneurial hats back on again for a moment. When you were acquired by Seismic, some founders stay on, some are get me out of here as soon as possible. What was your experience like? And what sort of role did you establish for yourself when you were on board?
It was a great experience at Seismic. I became the GM for the product, and so I think our big concerns once we did the deal were really let's make sure the employees are well taken care of. They had done, got us to that point. We were about 65 employees at the time. And so we wanted to make sure that they were set up for success. And then our customers as well were fantastic and very loyal, did a lot to build our business and even helped us, sell the business. So making sure that they were set up for success as much as possible. And so as the GM, we kind of did a phased integration of the operations, I would say. We started with sales and marketing and did an overlay and integrated. We didn't have a big sales team, but we integrated within the Seismic environment, which much bigger sales team. We were going from like a 65 person company to like a 1,200 person company. So it was pretty substantial. They did provide, we had some operational leaders that sort of ran a project to make sure that migration and transition worked well. And then I supported that from like the executive point of view. So they, did me great honor and pointed me to the executive committee. And I got to sit in on the executive committee meetings with the CEO and CMO and CFO and head of sales, and sort of see how the company was making decisions, what priorities were happening. And it was really good because as we started figuring out how to integrate not just the people, but the technology and sort of migrating to the Seismic structure, there's a lot of decisions that happen. And what I was able to do was provide context for why those decisions were getting made. And so, nothing ever goes smoothly. There's always some frustration here and there. And but if you have an understanding of, oh, well, this, is a huge thing that's happening right now, so we can't, just go do these other things. Those things have to wait. That it helped, I think. It helped, keep the people positive and moving forward. Change is hard, but that's kind of what I did for the 2 years I was there, pretty much, was manage that change, manage the customers, help out the sales teams. I wanted
to ask on the sales front, was Seismic still sort of the lead solution into a sales engagement? And then the Grapevine6 component, now part of Seismic, would be pulled in, or sometimes the need was your area first? What tended to be the case?
We were really strong in wealth management. So if there was a wealth management opportunity, we would typically see leading with social, because everybody had that need. Yeah. Seismic, as a content marketing system for salespeople, had a strong base in asset management, because asset management requires strict document control for your sales documents. You can't have out-of-date fund performance numbers, and you can't have the wrong ones, for sure. And so they had a whole bunch of controls around that. That's really where they built their business. So the migrating Seismic over to the wealth management side was a longer term play. And so we would often bring them into our accounts. They would bring us into their accounts. A net new sales, usually, Seismic was just so much bigger, and there was, I can't remember how big the sales team was, but it was like hundreds of people. So it was hard to educate them all on, enough of live social to go in and lead with it. So right. If they heard social, they knew I can call, one of the experts, and they can come into this meeting and help me out. But they would usually lead with Seismic, because that's what they knew, and that was the strongest to sell. So, but much like
exchange of knowledge
is hard.
Yeah. There was the exchange of knowledge and expertise, and we were all serving Seismic's objectives. So, I just wondered how that dynamic played out. So you stay at Seismic for 2+ years, and then you decide to leave for sabbatical. So talk to us a little bit about, one, that decision, to what the sabbatical has been like and what you've been up to.
Sure. Yeah. It was great because I had the 2 years to take a good look around at Seismic and, talk to the heads of the different areas. And there was some stuff that was interesting, but it wasn't, I didn't have that feeling like I got to go do this. Right. And, there's stuff like if somebody asked, like maybe you would say, yeah, it's interesting enough. I'll go do that for a little bit. But there was nothing that popped up that I had to go do.
You didn't need
to
go walk the earth.
Yeah, and so once we had moved, like at the end, nobody was reporting to me. I was just kind of, supporting some big sales cycles. But even those, they were getting to where they're fairly autonomous, right? It helped if I was there, but I didn't have to be there. So that was kind of the right timing to transition and kind of move out. And then it's a lot of work, right? Like it was nice. It was a nice way because I kind of ramped down a little bit. Like it wasn't full manic, which it was, pretty intense at the end of 2019, 2020. That was when we were really in hyper growth mode. It was busy. Like it was a lot of travel. It was a lot of sales pitches, customer challenges, hiring a bunch of people. It was very intense. So with Seismic, it started intense because there were so many decisions to be made, but then as things kind of moved off, it slowed down. So that was kind of nice. It wasn't like a hard stop and fall off a cliff. And so, yeah, it was a lot of stuff that I put on hold or just didn't really do when I was doing this startup. Like it always felt like, because it was our money, like we bootstrapped the company. If you weren't working on it, then you were putting your own, money at risk, right? Like there's got to be nothing would ever guarantee success, but there was every other thing you did increased the chances.
Yeah.
So you'd be constantly thinking, what can I do? What else can I do? Can I read something else? Can I call somebody else? And so that mindset, was tough to unwind. And so it was good to take a break, but it sort of didn't leave much room for hobbies. And so I picked up playing guitar again, which I hadn't done in a long time. As part of my sabbatical, I started playing video games, which I hadn't played in a while, or like very, periodic, which I love. I think if anybody really is, into user experience design, like they're so rich in design and thoughtful interface, and like there's so much to learn there, and they're fun.
Where they've come to from when I was a kid is just like, it's awe-inspiring. So
people complain the kids are playing video games all the time. I'm like, have you played these video games? These are amazing. I used to play video games all the time, and it was 8-bit. It was not great.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, it's kind of picking up some of those hobbies and not in just unwinding for a little while. So that was kind of the idea with the sabbatical, and then started doing attending, listening to podcasts, attending some webinars, attending some conferences, just to see if something sparked, if there was something interesting. And then I attended one U of T speaker panel, which I think Rodman was one of the sponsors. And there was a woman on that had started this organization, Nobellum, aimed at supporting 100 Black-owned tech companies by 2025, and she was super impactful speaker and very personable and smart, and it was just awesome that her story was great, and she was actually doing something about it. It was very entrepreneurial, right? So I said, if there's anything, I know how hard it is to be an entrepreneur. And she hadn't given up her day job. This was a side job and still putting this thing together and running companies through the court. And so my thing was, hey, like, I know this is really hard. And if there's something I can do to help, I don't know what it is, because I don't know what challenges you have, but I'm happy to jump in and help. And then she had, at the time, she was thinking about building an app that would sort of facilitate sort of relationships in the community, but so we're going to talk about that. But then there was another event, and so they invited me to talk or just to have a conversation and talk about what we're going to do for this event. And I had some ideas and some from my experience, just sort of drawing on what we had done as a startup, because it's a very startup kind of organization, or just things I learned in marketing, and she liked that. So I've been working with them now for like 6 months, past 6 months. So I'm an advisor to them, as well as they have a cohort now of 24 companies for their annual sort of curriculum and acceleration, program. And so this year, 24, and each one gets a coach or a mentor. And so I'm mentoring 4 of the companies, which is awesome, because it's like all these very different challenges, different technologies, different people. I don't have to do a lot of work for it, so it's quite good.
It just makes me think of, from The Godfather. Just when I thought it was out, they pulled me back in again. But you're being pulled back in because you want to. Like you've found someone who's impressed you, and they're doing interesting things, and there's a way for you to continue to contribute and have an impact. And I can see why that would resonate with you.
Yeah, and I think it was huge that we had 5 co-founders in our company, which is unusual, and was challenging on occasion when we were trying to make sort of big decisions of like, are we going to keep going, or we're going to fold this thing? But it was such a great built-in support network, right? And it's so stressful and hard being an entrepreneur, because it's often isolating, or you're alone. And if you have a partner, that if you're at odds with them on something, like to have external support. And we did have a ton of external support too, with people we had met through Rotman, or people that we had worked for or with, or what, like there was nobody, I don't think generally, especially in Toronto, but anywhere really, didn't take our call and offer to help if we were asking for some advice or insights. And so I think it's huge. That really is a major contribution. And people don't realize that too, when they're especially early stage entrepreneurs, that they can go out and ask those questions sometimes. And so just trying to make sure that they're encouraged to do that and well supported, and try and increase the chances of success, because it's tough.
Well, you've set me up for my last question. It's been something I was having a conversation about earlier this week, that it was a comment from someone else who's a founder, and they were talking about, and they're quite versed and familiar with the startup community here in Toronto, but what they were finding sort of perplexing was this: we're talking to a lot of young founders who, at the first sense of resistance to their idea, or the first person says that's a dumb idea or whatever, they're turning and running. There doesn't seem to be some persistence or resilience. And I just wondered, like, given, the journey that you took, what advice, if any, do you have for founders? And it doesn't have to be a tech startup, just for founding entrepreneurs. What advice could you leave them with?
Well, I think having that like network of advisors, or just people that you trust, people with a bit more experience. I think a lot of it comes from experience, where even for me, and I started entrepreneur, like a company pretty late, like I was over 40. But I had spent years in consulting and marketing and doing all this stuff. So I had a fairly confident in my ability to solve problems and figure stuff out. But when we would work with, billion-dollar companies and trying to do a partnership agreement, and you realize they don't really know what they're doing. You're trying to defer. You're like, okay, well, they figured this out because they're 100, 500 times bigger than we are. No, they haven't necessarily figured it out. They're not any smarter than you are, and you often think like, well, why hasn't somebody solved this problem? Well, sometimes if you look at the people out there solving problems, or what problems they're trying to solve, like it's obvious, yeah, like maybe these aren't the best problem solving people in the world, or they just haven't figured it all out. There's so many problems that they're trying to solve, that this is like, low on the list for them, because it's too small a problem and they're too big. Or for you, it may be a great size opportunity because you're small. So I think that comes with experience, and it's a great story to sort of relate that, just because, somebody thinks it's not a great idea, doesn't mean like they actually know what they're talking about.
Yeah. To your point, if you seek out some advisors, talk to more people. It shouldn't be a sample survey of one.
Yes. Yeah, because again, I think the other big thing that people miss on that is the more you tell the story, the better the story gets, right? The stronger your storytelling, the more ways that you can adapt that story to your audience, the better you can like read an audience. It's much like the, writing, right? Like the sharing content and posting, creating content on LinkedIn. That action evolves your ability to tell your own story, and people don't, you hate it by the end, right? Like once you've told that story 100 or 200 times, like, okay, we got to talk about social media, really? But you can tell it 100 different ways. You can read the audience. You can figure out where the jokes are. You can, do dial it up or dial it down. Like it can be like one of the things that we're working on is they're doing a 3-minute pitch competition at the city of Toronto is hosting a small business conference.
Mm-hmm.
And 3 minutes is super tough, right? Because that's a very short window to tell a story. But if you can get your story down to 3 minutes, you know your story, right? These are the 3 key things I need to say. This is the one takeaway I want everyone to remember. This is how I'm going to tell it in a really compelling way. It's harder to do it in 3 minutes, but I think it's more valuable. And I think that exactly, you telling that story more often, talking to more people, not only gives you a bit more valid data set, and not those outliers, but it makes your pitch that much better and your sales. So that it's a great exercise, and treat it. I think that's one of the other things I look into marketing is like nobody prepares for a pitch like marketing, right? Like it can be 3 months to prepare for a pitch. They got consultants coming in, like what. Designing the experience, like where is it going to sit? How's the lighting going to look? Like, it's awesome. Like, so you need to take a little bit of that to again, do better than the next guy, because they really aren't necessarily that good.
Well, you make me think of a startup that I worked for. The CEO would go on the investment roadshow, and he shared with me once, he said, I would get lit up with the first meeting, but after a couple of weeks of meeting after meeting after meeting, I'd heard every question that people had thought of, and he had answers for all of them. But it wasn't, it's just practice, and getting through that gauntlet of experience, and that trial by fire, you can anticipate the questions. It's not that you have a canned response, but your credibility grows and so on. And I don't know, like if you went through something similar in your own journey, but to your point, the 3 minutes these people are going to go through is going to serve them well.
We had like, if you really take it serious and work on sales and do the pitches and realize, hey, especially like, $1 million when you have $1 million in revenue, $1 million sale is massive. Right. And especially you don't have any money and you have to pay people. We had one pitch, which was huge pitch, like 30 people in the room and on the phone, and like 2-hour pitch. And it was down to exactly like you said, like the slides would prompt questions, like, and as soon as somebody asked a question, it was answered by the next slide. Like it had such a rhythm to the meeting that we had a new salesperson that was sitting in with us, and Wayne and I did the pitch, and it was like, but every question was, oh, what about this? Let me show you how that works. That's the next slide. What about that? Oh, that's exactly the next slide. Let me show you how that works. When we solve that as well. Oh, that's a great, yeah, here's the answer. And he walked out, and he was just like, you could have just crushed that. That was the greatest sales meeting I've ever seen. And that it took forever to get there, but it feels amazing. Like that is and you playing sales as a sport. That's the Olympics. Yeah. So it was awesome.
Well, and you and Wayne were bloodied and bruised for it. So, Well, listen, thank you so much for this. Thoroughly enjoyed it, and congratulations on the journey that you've been on. And I wish you all I wish you all the best with your work with No Bound.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrew. Good chatting with you.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Low Production High Value Show. Be sure to give us a rating and subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode. Don't forget to check out Volterra at volterradigital.com to learn more about how they can support your social media marketing.